Good day, everyone. I say good day because I've been traveling so much recently, I've genuinely forgotten what day it is, what time it is. Transatlantic travel does that to you. So my name is Alistair MacDonald. I'm with Morgan Stanley. Together with Naeem, Rehman, we're going to cover revolutionizing counterparty credit risk. And when I talk about revolutionizing, I'm talking about the industrial revolution type rather than the American Revolution. Don't like to talk about that too much, being British. So let's get into it. This is a forward-looking statement. I'll put my hands up in the air and say I have very little money, so if anybody wants to sue me, don't waste your time. It's genuinely not worth it. If you are going to try and sue Morgan Stanley or Databricks, you should probably read this first. It will cover a lot of your questions. So who is Morgan Stanley? Not to be confused with JP Morgan, despite Jamie Dimon being on the keynote. We are not related. Morgan Stanley is a global financial services firm providing a range of financial products across the globe in many different countries. If anybody wants to know more, visit morganstanley.com or come see me afterwards. All right, here we go. Did you know SACCR implementation can impact capital adequacy by over 100 basis points? Now, what does that mean? I'll cover that in a second, but basically what it means is SACCR is a regulation. It's called the Standardized Approach to Counterparty Credit Risk. I do have a tattoo of that because I've said it so many times. And what it does is it impacts a bank's capital. Now, if cash is king, then capital is the entire royal family, including Harry and Meghan. And capital is key to doing business. So the more capital you have, the more business you can do. The better capital adequacy you have, the more business you can do. You get the point. And when these regulations come in, we have to adapt them. We're a big bank. We're one of the top 4 banks in the world. We have to adhere to the regulations. It's critical to maintaining a stable financial system. So something that can impact our capital adequacy by 100 basis points is pretty huge. This is SACCR. It's a Basel III standardized approach for counterparty credit risk. So anybody familiar with Basel regulations, SACCR is one of the Basel III regulations. Why does it matter? I kind of covered this already. Let's say it again, because it is important. It impacts our regulatory capital requirements and maintains a stable financial system. So, really, really key to the world going round. If any of us remember 2008, it was not a fun time when this stability is very much compromised. How does it impact risk management? It requires a systems and a model overhaul. It's a new calculation. It requires a lot of data points. It requires a lot of complex calculations to happen. And it drives a need for capital optimization strategies. We don't just take these regulations and adhere to them. We try and optimize on them as much as possible. In a way, we adapt our trading strategies, and we'll adapt various other booking models, et cetera, so that we can drive down those capital requirements. So what does it look like? It looks like this. It's super simple. Probably looks like every other capital calculation you've seen. It takes derivatives exposure. So SACCR is primarily focused on financial derivatives. So things like commodities, equities, et cetera. It takes your derivatives, takes your collateral, runs through a calculation. It calculates something called exposure at default. Now, exposure at default is, as it says on the tin, how much Morgan Stanley would be exposed from a capital perspective if one of their counterparties were to default. Then multiplies that by a risk weight. For example, our good friends at JP Morgan are not as risky as, let's say, Silicon Valley Bank, to come up with a capital ratio and total capital requirements. So how does it impact Morgan Stanley? We need to take a different approach to counterparty risk from what we have previously. Previously, there were regulations in place which kind of, to be misquoted slightly, kind of allowed us to create our own model called IMM, so the internal model methodologies. And those models were not standardized, so that's where the S in SACCR comes into play. So what was the issue? Now, there's a few things keep me awake at night. One of them is transatlantic travel. The other one is not being able to deliver on a business deliverable because of technology limitation. And that's where we ended up with SACCR. We use the word legacy systems here. Legacy is probably a bit of a misnomer in this case. They weren't strictly legacy. The systems were only 4 years old. I'd say it was more of a legacy on-prem architecture than a legacy system. So don't think Perl, think Java microservices. It made SACCR scenario modeling slow and efficient. So if you remember, I talked about those optimization scenarios that we wanted to run. They became impossible. The data was too big, the calculations were too complex, it was just taking too long, so we just couldn't do it. And the other thing, it delayed a regulatory response. It hindered our compliance. These regulators, they set a date for where we need to be compliant. That date doesn't move. It rarely moves. It doesn't move. Sometimes it does. Depends who's in power at the time. And our infrastructure just couldn't handle what we were doing. So in stepped Databricks. Databricks enabled a scalable platform that cut our processing time from 24 hours to 45 minutes. That was significant. It was huge. It was a game changer for us. It was revolutionary. So the revolutionary part I'm talking about. It allowed us to think differently about our calculations. Rather than being a calculation that we have to run once a day because the regulators tell us to, it was a calculation we could run 1,000 times a day if we wanted to, which we do. So we need to run this calculation for multiple different reasons. We run it daily just to keep on top of our capital, but we also run what's called a forecast scenario. So much like a weather forecast, forecast looks out into the future to try and predict what would happen under certain conditions. So financial crisis, for example, is a forecast. And these forecasts are very complex, a lot of complex data points. So we use Databricks to model those forecasts. We use Databricks to apply the forecast to our data. We use Databricks to run the calculation and produce those exposure default numbers. And then we apply analytics on top of it that allow us to make sense of it. So kind of some headline numbers here. So 50% lower RWA impact of SACCR. Now, I had to redact the actual dollar numbers from here, but you can find it if you look hard enough on the internet. And that was huge. At the time, it made the news. Didn't exactly make BBC News, but it made some news outlets, which you can find the articles. And it allowed us to kind of drive more revenue through the firm. So super important. Being able to run those optimization scenarios multiple times a day really led to that. 30 times increase in the number of scenarios per cycle. So if you remember, financial crisis is one of those scenarios we run. We were able to run many different models. We were able to run challenger models to our actual models. And we significantly changed the risk profile of Morgan Stanley. We revolutionized it. 18 times increase in data volume. That can be good or bad. In our case, it was good. More data means that we can do more stuff. We kind of feed that data back into the forecasting engines as it comes out, and we can run different scenarios based on what's coming out. 97% reduced turnaround time from 24 hours to 45 minutes. Don't need to explain why that's important. But the 24 hours probably doesn't encapsulate the number of people that were involved in it as well. So that was 24 hours with 4 people working probably 2 or 3 days. So actually, it was probably 2 or 3 days, whereas now it's 45 minutes. Press a button, have a cup of tea, and see you in 45 minutes. And there's a quote there from our CFO, Sharon Shaya, on how the SACCR migration efforts allowed us to utilize our capital better. And that was presented to the investor call. So to put it simply, our data requirements became a business imperative. And that was the problem that kept me awake at night that Databricks helped us solve. The more scenarios we can model, the more accurate the forecast, the more trust we have in our capital requirements, the more trust the regulators have in our capital requirements, the stabler the system. The more capital we can put to work, the more dollars we have in the bank. Again, a couple of headliners here. 24 hours to model a single scenario just wasn't good enough from our on-prem implementation, and we scaled it by 30 times. So I'm going to hand over to Naeem to explain how we've done that.
Yep, I think there's one more slide. Right. So thank you, Alistair. So now we know what SACCR is and why it matters. But implementing SACCR at a firm like Morgan Stanley posed a few technical challenges. First, the calculation engine takes data from a variety of sources. These sources are large and inconsistent. Real-time data harmonization was needed. Next, the calculations themselves were very complex. They were granular and multidimensional, requiring a highly scalable compute. And to remain actionable, the risk outputs needed to be generated daily, even intraday. Legacy systems could not keep up to pace and frequency at which they were required to be outputted. And the regulators really needed to know how we are getting and calculating each and every number. This required full data lineage, transparency, and testability. That's where Databricks came in. right? So Morgan really wanted to build a forecasting engine that can simulate thousands of scenarios on demand. So let me walk you through how Databricks helped building it. First, Delta Lake allowed us to handle all the large and inconsistent data volumes by bringing together all the data in a unified, reliable format with ACID transactions. This allowed us to have fewer downstream issues and much smoother pipelines. Next, by using Spark-based compute as the backend, we were able to actually take all these complex calculations and distribute them across various clusters, dramatically improving performance and unlocking the ability to run a lot of these scenarios on demand. Previously, running these scenarios, as Alistair mentioned, took a while to run, so we could not run them frequently. But with Databricks workflows, you have the ability now to automate the pipeline end to end, from data ingestion to the calculation all the way down to the output, cutting down what used to take over a day into under an hour. With Unity catalogs, built-in data lineage, and governance capabilities, Databricks provided us with the tools to trace each and every single step of the pipeline. This provided transparency not only to the regulators, but also to internal risk and compliance teams. So really, the scalability of the Databricks Intelligence Platform allowed Morgan Stanley to run and simulate thousands of these scenarios with using various assumptions at a pace and depth that was not possible before. And this fundamentally changed the way Morgan Stanley approached risk and compliance strategy. Now, Alistair will talk about what this meant for Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, what did it mean? Capital savings, again, capital is king. Revenue potential, this was huge. This was huge for us. We'd for 20, 25 years looked at these calculations as a necessary evil to kind of keep the system stable, but we now look at them as optimization opportunities. We've got front office partners that are looking at our data, all of that data, to make sense of it and figure out how they can optimize on their capital. They can run scenarios through the Databricks engine. They can look at what would happen if they booked against Alphabet instead of Google. These kind of things are all kind of stuff they can do. Competitive positioning, a 30 times improvement in forecasting capability, unrivaled capability to run thousands of forecasting scenarios. I don't see Jamie Dimon here, but if he is, we can do it better than JP Morgan. So productivity, 32 times improvement in forecasting process efficiency, weeks to hours. So we've gone from manually running these forecasts through legacy systems and then spending weeks pouring through the data to being able to turn it around in a couple of hours using data insights to really drive into that. 32 times faster computation for SACCR calculations. If we do have an issue, a data issue that needs to be resolved, we can rerun the calculation and spin it around pretty quickly, which is kind of vital to our day-to-day running. And then finally, compliance. Enhanced accuracy and exposure at default. Now that's really key because ultimately if our calculator is wrong, the number is still correct. It's still our number. It's the number that we report to the regulators. So that calculator has to be right. We don't have any choice. So the kind of hidden benefit of using Databricks is we can run multiple different scenarios. We can run changes in UAT. We can run kind of blue-green deployments. All these kind of things we can do to make sure that those numbers are right. We can increase our testing capability as well. And then, furthermore, we can validate capital optimizations. And I think, obviously, also regulatory optimizations. We will make decisions based on how we interpret regulatory policy that the regulators might disagree with. And we have an open dialogue with the regulators to resolve that. And we're able to run multiple calculations to show the difference, X versus Y. And that's really powerful to us. So some lessons learned here. Collaboration is crucial. I think for many years that I've been at Morgan Stanley, we've worked with vendors, consumed their products, struggled to implement their products, became very familiar with Stack Overflow, and kind of worked through it. And then Databricks came along, and they said, hey, why don't we help you? And initially I thought, Okay, yeah, thank you for the empty offer, but no thanks. And they really engaged with us. So as technologists in a bank, we're often talked about creating a partnership with our business partners. But I think what we thought differently here is creating a partnership with our technology partners as well, like Naeem and others. So really critical to the success of what we've done here, because they just brought so much to the table that we wouldn't have thought about. Hopefully, I don't need to convince anybody here that cloud native is the future. If I do, come back on Thursday afternoon, and I'll see if I still got some work to do. But SACCR demanded a cloud native architecture. It just didn't work on-prem. We couldn't scale it. It was impossible, technically impossible. Data-driven by design, the data sets here are huge that we're talking about. We're talking tens of millions of positions, hundreds of billions of dollars of exposure at default. So, driving the design of a calculator through the data is a bit of a paradigm shift for us as well. And then adaptability and scalability equals resilience. We have to run this thing every day. We have to run it by a certain time. It has to be signed off. It has to be reported. All these wonderful things that come through operating in a regulatory environment. Databricks really helped us with the resilience on that side as well. And then finally, innovation through talent. So one of the key differentiators of Morgan Stanley is we promote a culture of innovation as much as possible. So this whole architecture evolved. I adhere to the Agile Manifesto that the best architectures come from self-organizing teams, and this really did. This was a collaborative effort across the globe from my development teams to come up with an architecture that's scalable and really solves this kind of challenge that we faced. So I'll hand it back to Naeem to cover a few more.
Awesome. Thanks, Alistair. So as we close, I want to leave you guys with some key takeaways, some actionable insights that maybe you guys can take back to your organizations, right? So first, scale is no longer a technical luxury. It's a business imperative now. Complexities of regulations like SACCR, FRTB, Basel IV is only increasing, and you need infrastructure that can keep up to pace with that. Second, legacy systems are not built to solve for today's data problems. So if you're still relying on manual processes, siloed data pipelines, you might be losing time, capital, and even a strategic advantage with your other peers. So data and AI platforms like Databricks are actually purpose-built for these challenges. They combine governance, intelligence, compute together, giving you the ability to act with confidence. And in summary, the Morgan Stanley story that we just shared shows you what is possible. We are talking about 30x scale, 97% faster turnaround time, and millions in capital optimizations. So ask yourselves, where can you unlock similar value? Where are the risk teams at your organization still struggling? Where can these calculations be made faster? And that's where we come in. So let's have a conversation. Let's build something that's scalable, something resilient. Let's build something that can turn compliance into a strategic advantage. Thank you. That's all we have for today, and we can take questions after.